Welcome to our Instagram Live, our series we've been doing with BRM Pros, just game changers throughout the world. And I'm so honored and excited to introduce you to Anne Heckheimer. Anne is a BRM Pro. She's also a teaching assistant. So she runs with many of our amazing TAs. She runs our study sessions and our tool times, small group sessions in our pro training. And she's a powerhouse in the New York City perinatal space. So welcome, Anne. How are you today?
Hi, Lindsay. How you doing? I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. So this talk is all about the evolution of physiological birth. And we were talking before we went live about just maybe we start with just defining what is physiological birth versus maybe the medical model of birth. And let's just start with that. Like, what does that even mean to you?
Well, the physiological birth model is something that we learned about in the BRM training and the body ready birth training. And for me, it means that in the physiological birth model, we are looking at birth basically as lifeguards, so that when we're watching people in birth, they are allowing their body to do what it's supposed to naturally. So we're just there to kind of keep guard, so to speak, and to help facilitate labor and birth with natural means. So the body can basically do its own job and that it will intuitively know what to do.
Yeah, I love that. I think I like to think of physiology as like powered by our own innate human capacity. And, we're like designed and built to birth babies. And I think, throughout the years, we talk about the evolution of birth in general. It's been kind of a violent history, right? There's been kind of a lot of really terrible things, and the power has been taken away from the families and the birthers, and there's just been a big shift happening. So, like I see the physiological, and it's kind of a paradigm, right? We see on one side the medical model saying, like this is something that we need to save you from. You are broken, you are damaged. Let's just get this baby out however we need to. We see on the far other end people saying like, trust birth, never intervene, like it always works. Like leave it alone. And then there's like this space in the middle, right? Like, and I feel like, I don't know about you, but I kind of live in this space in the middle. I've been to enough births and worked in this industry long enough. I know you have as well, like 15, 20 years, that we see, you can do everything right and you can still need support,
Exactly.
right?
Yes. And I like that in between space because you can find that sweet spot between the physiological and the medical model. And I think that we talked about this a little bit beforehand about filling your toolbox, with education and knowledge is power. And I think that sometimes people just want to be told what to do, but when you're in the deer in headlights, if you know what interventions you might need that can physiologically support your birth, it might be better for you emotionally and long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and when we say like, let's say there's a labor stall, let's say like something that's always like the easiest one to talk about physiologically versus medical model. But when there's a labor stall, like how have we handled that throughout the years? Like we talk evolution, what would you see for like the evolution of handling a delay in progress, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so even with the trainings, it's like, I know that I've learned so much over the last couple of years since starting with Body Ready Method and just learning about the birth processes, about, the biomechanics of birth. Like that, I think, has evolved exponentially over the last 5, maybe 10 years. But
Yeah.
just learning about how the pelvis works, in labor and delivery. And, my son, we've also talked about this. My son is 19 and I've been in the birth world for close to 30 years. But what I know now, I didn't know 19, 20 years ago. So I feel like we have so much to give to our clients in terms of educating them so that they're so prepared and empowered for their birth. I think that, the medical model can be a bit disempowering.
Right.
So when I see clients for massage movement sessions, I really try to have them walk out the door feeling empowered in their body so that their body will know what to do when they get to the day.
And I think that's beautiful and so different than like sometimes the medical model is like just doing things to you, where like we don't want to take that and do that in the physiological birth model, right? Like we don't want to just say, oh, you're broken, do all these exercises, or I have to release all these things. Yes, we know movements and we know techniques that can help facilitate greater ease. But that doesn't, like, we want to empower them with that knowledge, because the beautiful thing about, I think about this work is like the same stuff that helps you just feel more embodied and more well in your body also helps you birth your baby more easily, right? And so like for me, you know, I tend to be like a glute gripper and an ab gripper, and that's not really great for birth, but it's not really great for my nervous system and my life either. And so I'm done having babies. I've had my 4. But this knowledge still stays with me because I believe humans should know about their body and should feel good in their bodies. And this is just information for life. And so I just think it's so beautiful. And I think birth tends to be the catalyst for a lot of people, right? It can be a catalyst for really positive change in their life. And it can sometimes be the catalyst for a lot of trauma and kind of going the other way. And I think society, like if we could empower people at that space in their life. And I remember my second birth, after being very disempowered in my first, my second birth was so empowering. It literally changed the course of my life. I became a doula, childbirth like I wouldn't be doing all of this without my own empowered birth experience. I realized like, oh, I am powerful. I can do things, right? Where I was like this shy, kind of unsure of myself individual that I am not today, because birth was that catalyst of change for me. And I want that for other people, right? Like we don't need to just strap people in beds and tell them they're broken and pump them full of medication. Sometimes we need those things, right? Like those things are not evil. Thank God we have cesareans and Pitocin and breaking the water for the small instances that it's needed. But let's empower people to understand, like, there are things we could do that have way less risks that could also empower and support your innate human capacity, right? Like maybe we just need to release your sacrotuberous ligament because you're a big athlete and you do a lot of back arching things. So as a doula, I'm thinking, or you as a body worker, you're thinking, oh, you're a gymnast. Okay. Yes. Like we've just been watching the Olympics. I've been watching these amazing feats that people can do with their bodies, and their bodies adapt to that. And so let's bring it back to the physiology. What happens when you compete at a high level gymnast for decades? Like your body adapts to that. So now bring you into the physiological birth model. Let's address that. And let's, not because you're broken, because you're beautiful. Your body's adapted to do that really cool thing that my body can't do.
Right.
But it might make that ligament very dense. And so let's address it, ideally prenatally, right? Like that's all you. People are coming to see you prenatally to help empower them to make different decisions in their body prep, right?
And what's good about our work, Body Ready Method, is that we can kind of look at each individual client and do an assessment. Like if you're not assessing, you're guessing at what could be going on, so that it's good to like look at the body and say, let me look at your body and see what's going on and how can we address this, so that I think it's an elevated experience when people work with BRM doulas or myself coming to see me, because I'm more aware, maybe educated about the biomechanics of birth. And people, I think it's all about empowerment. I think that birth should be an empowering experience for people. And it's my job to help them to get to that point. And as they get closer to the birthday, to try and help them to kind of get into their flow state so that they can be ready for it. And also that they can downregulate their nervous system. I think that we see a lot of people so amped up in our society about having it done, have it happen perfectly for them. Like I want to have a perfect birth, and then they get themselves so tied up.
Right.
So that I try to give them the tools to kind of release themselves and to downregulate, to turn down the lights
Right. And
you
just
know?
flow. Like if you're fighting and you're resisting the wave, if I think of surfing, like you have to flow with whatever wave you're given, right? And that's part
Right,
of it is like some people get big waves, some people get fast waves, some people get short waves.
right.
I'm not a surfer, so it's not a perfect example, but right, you just got to ride the flow. You know, I just went through an international trip that had all kinds of drama, like delays and everything. And like if I haven't learned one thing from birth and working in birth, it's like you either flow or you're resisting. And when you're resisting, it's a lot more challenging. And I had both of those moments. And you can get to that moment where you're fighting the wave and then you
Yes,
realize, oh, wait, resist and flow. And I can flow into this more easily. So I
right.
think, yeah, it's like addressing the nervous system and the body. It's all woven together, right?
Yes,
And birth is physical, it's spiritual, it's mental. It calls on our entire being, no matter what type of birth, right? Medicated,
yeah,
unmedicated, surgical, not surgical. It calls on all aspects of our being. And I think as birth workers, we should, you know, we recently had a comment. Someone's like, I was giving like the new way that I teach the hip squeeze,
hmm,
and someone's like, but you're a doula. You don't do interventions. And so let's talk about that, like the evolution of even birth work, right? Because I think some people think a doula's role is to give you sips of water and say, good job. And those are great things. But there's also more we can offer, right? We can offer people a deeper understanding of what's going on in their body. And me as a birth worker, I'm not like constantly knowing the biomechanics of the pelvis does not mean that I'm constantly moving someone and pushing them and like managing their birth the way sometimes the medical model does. It means that I'm aware in my brain and I have the tools and I'm like observing the process. And if and when it's needed, then I can do things. But a lot of times, we were talking about this before we went live, I learn a lot just by observing someone who feels safe in his birthing, right? We were having a conversation in our private Body Ready Method professional Facebook group about why do some people go on their tippy toes right before a
hmm,
baby's born? And so it was really fun because I can go back and using my awareness of the physiology and the biomechanics, we can say, maybe this is why, right? And if you think
yes,
evolution, we think, you know, thousands of years ago, the birth workers innately knew this stuff. They maybe didn't have the anatomy and like the scientific reasoning to explain it, but they knew it. And so
hmm,
what I'm teaching isn't new, right? And what we're teaching isn't new. It's just now backed up by a modern scientific understanding. And to me, if I can get more and more of that modern scientific understanding backed from the innate knowing of, you know, the birth workers of the past and even now, then we can get more buy-in from the medical model, right? And we can change the
absolutely.
way we do things on birth and we can get less injured, traumatized people,
Yes,
right?
absolutely makes sense. Yes.
Yeah,
So
so tell
I
me
think,
about your evolution. Like I want to hear, because you've been in the birth work for a while, right? You said 30 years. So like how have you seen things shift throughout those 30 years?
well, I think in terms of education, I think for me, I started out in the early 90s as a personal trainer. And I think early on in my career, I had a calling to working with pregnant people. I just always gravitated towards working with that population. And I can't tell you why. It just happened that way. And
Okay.
then I got my massage license. And again, I started to get pregnant clients. But I took classes and certification classes, and they gave me the basic knowledge. I had the basic knowledge of
Mm.
how to work with the pregnant body, but it really, again, didn't give me the scientific backing.
And it was
You
probably
know,
Kegels and squat, or maybe just Kegels back then for
yes,
sure. All the Kegels.
yes, how to avoid getting DR.
Sure.
Just how to avoid it. Sucking your belly in 100
Mm.
times a day. Like
Oh, of course.
you know,
Yeah.
but there was no scientific, backing. So I couldn't tell my clients why we're doing this. Like I would give exercises, I would say, okay, this is what you're supposed to do,
Right.
but I couldn't necessarily tell them why, you
Yeah,
know?
the why is
And
so important.
yes, and so, there was this kind of like little thing in the back of my head, like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Like
Right.
I needed my own self-esteem. I needed to feel more credibility. I needed in my career, I felt like I needed to gain credibility by gaining more education. So I've kind of continuously over the last 30 years, certification after certification that's come up. And, you know, it's just helped to build my foundation. Like I'm so grateful for where I started, you know, because it's gotten to me where I am today. Like,
Yes.
and I've continually going for more. Like, you know, in September, I'm coming to your city to study with Carol Phillips, who is, you know, on the staff
faculty.
on the staff this
so
time.
Great. Yeah.
So it's just like I'm in it, you know, I'm in it to win it, you know, kind of
knowledge
like it's
is
just
power,
yes,
right?
knowledge is power. And I feel the knowledge, it just helps with the clients that come to see me. I feel like, you know, I want to empower them, you know, by sharing my knowledge, you know, and I see that in you as well. Like your knowledge helps to empower thousands of people by spreading and sharing it with us. And I'm so grateful. And, you know, especially, I know we were talking about this beforehand, also over the last 5 years, you know, since COVID, you know, we have like, there've been some really horrible things that happened due to the pandemic. But one of the nice things is that we've been able to build a community and have like, I didn't have to come to Minnesota to take BRM.
Right. I know.
You know, I didn't have to come for an in-person workshop to, you know, and we can do it over like 6 months.
Yeah, it's really nice to space that out because your brain starts
and
to.
we can break it down, and not even just like the birth world, but just in general. Like you can study online now, and you can do so much more, and you can build communities through different groups. And I'm just so grateful for that. And you know, I found you through RYC, and you know, I'm just eternally grateful. I just feel like, you know, I don't want to say the links keep getting longer. I don't want to say there were any missing links, because I think my chain link keeps getting longer. I keep adding to it. You know, it's like the pyramid keeps getting higher. Right. And I just feel like we're so fortunate to have people like you and signing up, and even with all the information that you give on Instagram is just like priceless. You know, it's just really, it's time consuming for you to make these reels. I know it's not easy.
Of course, yeah.
You know, but I feel like it's your generosity. You're being generous by sharing this with people.
Well, you know, I think one of my missions in life is, I really believe I was put on this world to help, be part of the help of making birth on earth better, because I really feel like when people have empowered birth experiences, we can shift the whole world and elevate the whole world, because we need empowered families, and empowered families, and, you know, empowered people empower people, right? And so I will, and with the online work, I think that's a really good point, because, you know, and there's no, I don't feel competition with it either, because like, go learn from everyone, right? Like we need to learn from a variety of people in all the ways, in all the things. Like empower yourself with knowledge, with information, with techniques from all different sources. And that's where you're going to really feel like you are, like you said, like a lot of us feel like, I don't know what the right word is, but we feel like imposter. I guess imposter is the right word. Sometimes you feel like an imposter because you're like, do this release. And they're like, but why? And you're like, because I was told you should, right? And I think one of the things, and somebody actually told me, people don't want to know the why. When I was coming out with the first iteration of the Body Ready Method Pro training, someone was like, oh, they don't want to know the why, just tell them what to do. And I was like, I wanted to know the why. And so I think they want to know the why. I know it's a longer training, but I don't want you to just follow my techniques. I want you to see someone, to observe them, to look at them, to talk to them, and to work with them individually. And sometimes, because you know the why, you might come up with your own technique that's never been done. Like you might be like, well, because I know the biomechanics, because I know, the thoracolumbar fascia attaches the sacrum to the arm or some whatever random thing. Oh, that's why they're doing this. Or, oh, if I, and it's really fun to see in our pro training, just the diversity of ability to work with people in different stages of labor and postpartum and prenatal, because you have the actual innate like why behind all the work we're doing. So I think maybe that's how things have evolved too, is like, because we have a lot more, like research moves fast. It doesn't always go into clinical practice very fast, right? I think that they say it takes about 12 years for things to move from research to clinical practice. And that's an issue, but it doesn't have to take that long if we have savvy pros like you, like me, like doulas and midwives and nurses and yoga teachers that are like, no, I'm going to take it and I'm going to like bring it to my community. And the reason why I'm so committed to the online is like, we have people throughout the whole world, and travel is expensive and difficult. And we want access to this. I believe that this access should be as wide as possible. And so that's why we do a lot of scholarships and we do a lot of work to make sure that people have access throughout the world, because like, that's what's needed, right? Like we need to get this information in the hands of the people that are going to use it to shift things.
Birth happens everywhere. It's universal.
Right. Yeah, and some places have much, and that's the cool thing about our communities. We can learn about how birth is supported in different areas of the world, and there's some places that it's supported pretty well, and then there's a lot of places that it's really not supported well at all. And we see like one doula or one midwife coming through our training from their whole country and trying to like start a movement there, and it's just really cool to see that continue to grow and grow.
Yeah, we have people like from Africa, China.
Yeah, everywhere.
It's amazing.
So let's go back to the physiology and like how we've seen things shift. So I like to show in our pro training at the beginning some different depictions of birth from a long time ago. We see like Cleopatra's birth, where they're literally reaching her arm up. We mentioned that actually opens the bottom of the pelvis. Right. We see like I show this pioneer birth where they're pushing the knees in, and then we're thinking like, why? What does that? So like how have you seen things shift? Like, we used to support birth in a more physiologically driven way. And how has that evolved? And what do you see for the future of the physiological birth movement?
Well, I see, hopefully with the spreading of your training and maybe others like it, that more acceptance of the physiological birth model, because I feel like, I live in New York City, so I wouldn't say that there's a high acceptance of it. I think initially maybe 2021, 2020, people were not so keen on going to hospitals. So it might have escalated it. People like, oh, I don't want to go to hospital. I want to have I'm going to do a home birth because I don't want to go to hospital. There's no room in the hospital for doctors. So I feel like, there might have been an opening. And so that opening may have, we can build on that. Right. There's an opportunity to stick our foot in the door. And, oh, no, you're not going to close that door now, but like try to keep it going, build the momentum on that. And to continue to educate people on the physiological birth model versus the medical model. You can still deliver in a hospital having, no interventions and stuff like that, but by also educating, the doctors and the nurses, trying to make it more mainstream and educating people about the biomechanics of the pelvis. I'm not sure that that's really taught like in medical school.
Yeah. And we were talking before this, I've talked to many obstetricians, midwives, etc., but those two specifically, and labor and delivery nurses, who say like, we don't get trained on the biomechanics of the pelvis. And it's a huge blind spot, because if you think about it, like if you're not trained in it, how do most people give birth, right? Like they pull their knees into their armpits. They actually put their pelvis in a position that's actually narrowing where we're trying to open. And I remember the very first time I ever kind of like suggested internal hip rotation. I'd been thinking about it for a while, just because I was a biomechanist and an exercise physiology nerd before I was a doula. And we were at this home birth transfer. She had a long labor, first baby, home birth transfer. And we went into the hospital, and I say, it was actually a really great transfer. It was one of those hospitals that's actually was like pretty good for it. And I go, hey, can we try something? And we got her, and she had an epidural. We got her on her knees. We internally rotated her pelvis, and I did actually the hip squeeze at the ASIS. And they were like about to call a cesarean, 3 pushes in that position, her posterior asynclitic. So basically flip the other way for those who don't know, and then head tip to the side. So a bigger surface area came out vaginally. And the staff, I think they were kind of like, what just happened? Like we were so sure we were going to call for a cesarean, but we let this weird doula do her weird thing. And it was like a light bulb. And I remember going and finding, I don't remember who it was. We had like a birth expo the next day. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to tell you what we did. And it worked. And now I see that all over the place, internal hip rotation, but it's kind of like a game of telephone sometimes. I don't know if you've noticed that. Like I'll see people say things like knees in, ankles out, for example. You've probably heard that one. It's like, bring your knees in, but like bringing your knees in is not the same as internally rotating your hips, right? And so this whole term of like closed knee pushing, I don't like, because then the doctors go and they go, well, that's not working. We can't close our knees. And I'm like, no, we're not supposed to close our knees, right? We're only supposed to like internally rotate, which is not the same as closing the knees. And so I don't know if you've noticed that, but I think one of the things that, there's pros and cons to this knowledge getting out there, but sometimes the con is that there's like a disconnect. And if we can get better access to those people that are maybe a slightly disconnected, I think then the hospital staff will see what we're doing is valid, right? And it works.
Well, I started off, I think our conversation before we started live was talking about Call the Midwife, like the physiological birth model, where it seemed like they kind of knew about the movements. They might not have had the knowledge of the biomechanics, but it was more about the physiological. I think earlier in the seasons, it was more physiological. And then as time is going now into the 60s, it becomes more of the medical model. And I think there's more. What?
I haven't watched the later seasons. I might need to. That might be very interesting.
But it's like, and the nurses are still pushing back. There's a pushback, and gradually, like when they're transferred to the hospital, the non-birthing parent can't go into the room. They're put under general anesthesia. So that's kind of like into the 60s, earlys and 70s into the medical model. So I feel like we need to have like a revolution of back to the physiological birth model. And I feel like it's coming, letting the body, like let the body know what it's supposed to do, like support the birthing body, and to support the birthing body, we just have to continue to educate our clients.
Right.
This is why you need to know this, so that when you are giving birth, if something happens, then, we can do, maybe let's try this. You can have your birthing team. And, I studied the biomechanics of the pelvis.
And I can help you. Yeah. And I think that's another evolution or revolution that we need to have, is more birth workers having more access to this knowledge and information, because like somebody said in our thing, like, oh, doulas don't do that. Yes, doulas do. And so do midwives, and so do doctors, and so do nurses. And that's why our training as well, I didn't want to have it be just for doulas or just for midwives or just for chiropractors. Like, I believe if you work with pregnant or birthing bodies, you should continuously learn more. Like I'm still learning. We're all still learning. There's so much knowledge, and the more you know, the more you think you don't know anything. At least that's me. I'm like, but there's so much more to know.
Right.
And that's the journey of life. And that's the beauty of this work. I would get so bored. Like if I'm only teaching and I'm not also learning something new, I get a little itchy. Like I need to continuously learn and grow and evolve. And that's the human
Exactly.
experience. And if you want to
Yes.
love your job, which is what I do, and we, working with birthing families, then keep evolving and keep growing and keep learning, because that's the best thing. And like becoming a detective of and learning about like this unique family in front of me. What do they need? Like, how can I
Right.
support them? Right. One interview question that I always will get in doula interviews is like, how do you doula? Like, what's your doula? Like, what's your style? And I always can't, my answer is always depends. It depends on you, right? Some people think they're going to want like all my like cool massaging and different things. And then those are the people who are like, don't touch me, don't talk to me. Right. And then there's the people who are like, so sure they're not going to need that. And I'm like releasing them for hours. Right. And some people need a lot of verbal support. Others don't. Some people need very little, but I'm like that insurance policy of like, but I'm here if you need me. Like I know all of these techniques that hopefully
Right.
you're never going to need, right? I'm not doing techniques at every birth. Hopefully not. Like hopefully you've prepared people enough that you just like support that their beautiful process, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
And
So,
you do a lot of prenatal work. So tell me how you see that having evolved throughout the years, right?
okay. So, when I initially started my private practice, I started out doing both training and massage, but then I had my son back in 2005. So I decided I had to kind of consolidate because I couldn't do the 6 a.m. client anymore. So I decided to really build my practice. So I decided to focus on prenatal massage. And then I was seeing clients for general therapeutic prenatal massage. And then over time, I started to evolve with other trainings. So my foundation was starting to broaden, and I had to wait for that sweet spot time when I could really get out the door, not take my son to school in the morning, where I could travel and do these trainings. I'm sure you can relate because you have 4 kids. It's like, oh, I can't do that because I'm on, I'm on call with my kids. So like I gotta be there for the PTA meetings or whatever. But that time finally happened for me when my son was in middle school, and I was able to expand and like pick up other trainings, other specialties, abdominal massage. And then, I became a spinning babies aware practitioner. And the culmination of all of those trainings have really kind of helped, especially with the Body Ready method, have really helped me to kind of package my my services to my clients. Like I see clients and we do specialty services to help move their labor along. I do movement and massage to help kind of facilitate labor. And during the movement portion, I give them tools. So if they're not quite ready for labor, I give them movements that they should go home and do on a regular basis so that their body will be prepared for when it is ready to go into labor. So, I mean, it's not something that I think that should be forced, but I think, and then when I do give them the movements, such as like the aligned lunge with side bend glutes, you know what I'm talking about, and and maybe some spinning babies techniques thrown in there with that, and depending on the person, on what their body needs. If somebody is very round shouldered, forward, I'll make sure that I'm giving them upper body mobility stuff, because it's very important to have upper body mobility so that their whole canister is working synergistically together, so that the baby can sit comfortably and find its way into the pelvis. So I give people a lot of education so that in the time leading up till their body is ready to go into labor, they can feel assured or empowered that they have a toolbox that they can go home and use and not sit and wait and sit and twiddle their thumbs.
Yeah,
I
it
really
feels nice to
try.
have something to do, right?
Yeah, I
And
try and help them down regulate as well, like standing
yes,
psoas release, which some of this stuff may feel really woo-woo, I tell them, but it's so important to go and sit in your
yeah,
bathroom with the lights off, sit on your toilet, focus on your breathing. If you feel like when you are in labor and things aren't going as planned or as you had hoped, bring it back to your breath.
right. And that's
Focus
such
on
an
your,
important tool for a parent anyway, right? I think
yes,
if we can set people up to feel like good and feel like they have coping skills and down regulation skills, like, man, I can really use that when I have the baby up in the middle of the night and I'm
right.
so, and so,
Yes,
and the evolution of this, like, I feel like there's people that have been doing this forever, right? And have always been supporting their families in this way. It's really been dampened over the last several hundred years. And now we have the internet, we have access, we have social media, we have
right.
this stuff is getting in front of more people. And yes, the con of the game of telephone, sometimes there's weird, like interesting things. I'm like, oh, where that came from. But like I just see a world where like this is just how we support people, right? Like everyone has access to professionals who understand their physiology, their biomechanics, their biodynamics, how everything in their body works together. And like we don't just need professionals who know how to break water and do Pitocin. And thank God we have people who know when we should use those things,
Right.
right? And the judicious use of
Absolutely.
interventions can prevent additional interventions sometimes. And someone shouldn't feel like broken because they needed an intervention or chose an intervention, right? Like they have their place.
Right.
But we're not, I think sometimes people think when you're like into physiological birth, you think like all interventions are horrible or evil and doctors are awful and evil. And that's not what we think at all, right? But
Right.
they need to be empowered as well, right? Because I have a lot of doctors in my family and I have a lot of doctor friends who just aren't supported in that, right? Like they have a lot of drug companies coming up to tell them what their drug does, but they don't necessarily get supported to
Mm-hmm.
understand physiological birth either, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so I think, yeah. So if you were like we're kind of like gearing down, but I'm thinking of like the new someone who's just wanting to get into this field of work, like maybe you're wanting to be a doula or you want to be a prenatal massage instructor or whatever type of, what kind of like suggestions do you have for them? And then we'll answer some questions.
Well, for massage, if they're looking to become a prenatal massage therapist, I think it's very important to have, an education in terms of working with the pregnant body. Like there are various, certification, continuing education. I did mine personally when I first graduated from massage school. That was the first continuing education course I did, was I got certified as a prenatal massage therapist. And then for even for like a personal trainer or a doula, I think body ready method. I mean, honestly, I just
Get
think
trained.
that
Yeah.
just just get trained, find a way to do it,
Yeah.
like just find a way, you
Keep
know,
learning. I love that.
just keep learning, reach out, find your people, like find your people,
Yeah, find a
even,
community. That's huge.
if even if it's like, if you can't, like, I know that like for massage students, or it's, you have student loans to pay off, you know find the Instagram,
Right. I know.
find one or
Get
two
scrappy.
people, that you really admire or feel are the real deal, um like you and
Others. There's others. Yeah.
others. There's others out there,
Yeah.
but don't overwhelm yourself with, like, because they're, like you said, it's like a game of telephone. It can be a game of telephone. So you want to find the people that have what you want,
Yeah.
find the
Good.
people that have what you want, and then you kind of eventually you can do what they do, you know So we're studying with you so that we can do what you do with your clients or have done with your clients.
Right.
So that would be my best advice, like not everybody wants to do movement stuff with the pregnant person.
That's okay.
You know,
we all have
but,
our place
yeah.
in this, beautiful ecosystem of support. We have a really good question that came in, and I think you would love it as well. It says, you talk about the biomechanics of the pelvis, but it's so much more than that. Yes, it is. That's why we have 6 months to teach it, right? The core and the spine are also involved. Do you agree? And can you talk about that? Of course we agree. And Anne, do you want to say anything about that? And maybe we can.
Well, I think that, the Body Ready method is built on, 5-pillar system,
Yeah, that's true. One of the pillars is the core, right?
Right.
The upper body. It's so important.
Floor, but body movements, and core, pelvic floor, body movements, upper body.
You're right. I have to do it. Pelvis, pelvic floor, core. Now I can't do it in this mind because we're live, but yes, it all works together, right? Like the core supports baby's position. The core is the front of that entire canister. We talk a lot about the upper body and the role of the rib cage. And we're especially adding that this year because what's going to happen if the rib cage is locked down, right? As it is in so many of us, myself included. Well, that pressure is going to go down onto the pelvis, which is going to then change that pelvis's experience. Maybe it needs to actually rotate. Now we have a narrowed bottom of the pelvis. So as a BRM Pro, you should know by looking at someone's rib cage, as their alignment, at their pelvic position, what tools they may need, right? Because not everyone needs the same few things, right? Some people need very different things than other people based on, again, how they use their body. So your spine, of course, right? It's all connected via our fascial system, right? Everything is connected. And actually, the one thing I think I really love getting people to think about is the fact that our bones are not connected to each other, right? You remember that song that was like, your leg bone's connected to your hip bone, to your whatever?
Right.
The bones aren't connected. They're all floating in space, essentially, and it's our soft tissue. So, right. And there's so much, and like, sometimes I will see someone's like right shoulder be the thing that improves their like left hip. Right. And so we can't just go, I think we're in a society of, I call it dandelion pickers, right? And I don't know if there's dandelions in New York, isn't there? Right. It's like, they have very deep roots. And a lot of times we just go and we say, oh, you have pelvic pain. Okay. Oh, you have this. Okay. And we just like spot treat the symptom. And that's what the medical model does too. I remember in 2020, I had this really intense autoimmune reaction. And what did they do? They gave me like a medication. Oh, that medication gave me this other issue. Oh, here's another medication. Here's another medication. And those things can have their place, of course. But like for me, I needed to regulate my nervous system. I was going through a lot. My dad was dying, the pandemic, I was starting BRM, like there was a lot going on. And instead of addressing that, quick fix, dandelion pick. And so what do you do if you pick a dandelion and you don't get to the root? You got a new dandelion the next day or the same one, or it just keeps coming. And so I think that's the beauty of this work is like, yes, it's the pelvis, it's the core, it's the pelvic floor, it's the rib cage, it's the nervous system. And it's the beautiful dynamic dance of all of those things working together, right? It's not one of them. And it's not like, that's why Kegels, it's a spot treatment, right? It's not addressing why that, like, let's say the pelvic floor is tight. Well, why is it tight? It's not tight for no reason. It's tight because something else, it's maybe taking over for something else that's very, very weak. It's like trying to hold up something. And so we can't just say, oh, let's just like put a ball there and relax it. That can be in a temporary release, but like, let's address why it's tight. Maybe because we need to get something else working better. I think that's huge. What's this next question? Do you have anything you want to add to that before we move on?
No, I think we can move on.
So good. The question is, isn't sitting on a birth ball better than sitting on a toilet for birth? What do you think? I mean, it depends, right? There's not one that's better than the other, I would say. It depends on where you're at in your birth. It depends on you as an individual, right? What does your intuition say? I think we as birth workers, my goal is not to be like managing the birth the way that maybe the medical model does. I'm not saying go to the toilet. Okay, now go down hands and knees. Okay, now do this.
One is not better than the other. There's no cookie cutter. There's no
the
cookie
key.
cutter for birth. Like you're not going to find an identical birth from one person to the other. You can't create a cookie cutter, movement or, scenario for one person or the other. For one person, sitting on a birth ball might be better than sitting on a toilet.
Yeah, they can move their hips. Maybe they're flowing and they feel good and they can do all these different movements. That's amazing. But also, maybe their pelvic floor is resisting that movement. So maybe as a birth worker, I can say, hey, we've been on the birth ball for a while. Do you feel like you need to go to the bathroom? Because, we have to clear that bladder like at least once an hour because that bladder is in the way of baby's progress. I actually had a client with an epidural once who they forgot to catheterize her. And so her bladder was very full and they kept checking her and being like, why is she, this was like my third birth ever actually. They were like, why is she not going past 9.5? Oh, her bladder's in the way. Immediately after the bladder was emptied, her baby was born within like 10 minutes, very quick. Yeah. But and so sometimes we might say, hey, let's go to the toilet. That's a place where you're mentally used to relaxing your pelvic floor, right? So maybe we alternate between the two, right? Maybe we go on the toilet and we bring one knee higher than the other, or we put them into a squat, or, or we see what they intuitively find. And one thing I want to add about that question that I think is interesting is sometimes I notice, especially in hospital birth, the toilet is a great place because they're not bugging you there, right? I'll have people you come into the hospital, there's the intake questions, there's, getting you on the monitor. There's a lot of chaos that can disrupt that flow of birth. And I've noticed a lot of clients intuitively go to the bathroom, we shut off the light, they shut the door and they get space, right? That alone, it's not about the position, it's about feeling safer there and feeling like somebody is going to leave me alone because you can't, think about if you had to have a bowel movement and there's 5 people staring at you. It might be a little harder. So how can we allow ourselves to relax in that moment when there's a spotlight sometimes down there? That's hard. Okay, here's another question. Let's see. These days, birth workers talk a lot about Kegel versus pelvic floor exercises. Are they the same thing? Some says Kegels is old-fashioned and shouldn't be used. What's your opinion about that? You want to take this one, Anne?
Well, I think that, Kegels have their place, but I think that we have to, we've been taught that, contracting your pelvic floor has to happen in all ranges of motion. If you're able to contract your pelvic floor, you have to also be able to control the release of it as well. So, you can contract it and then you can let it release. Like sometimes I'll tell people to imagine that their pelvic floor is like a flower blooming. Like as they're releasing it, it's contracting and then it's blossoming on the release. But it's slowly, but it has to be like if you're contracting slowly, can you also release it slowly? So, I think it has a place for it as well. So I'm not, 100% against the Kegel.
Yeah, this says, first of all, the reason I like to call it a pelvic floor contraction versus a Kegel is that Dr. Kegel was a male and it used to be very much a thing of conquering the body and conquering this and naming the thing that you conquered. And I just don't believe that people own the movements of our body. And I just like to get out of that archaic practice. And so I like to call them pelvic floor contractions, but sometimes I'll call it a Kegel because that's a known thing for people. But I would love to just call it a pelvic floor contraction because what is it? It's just if this is a bicep, it's shorten, lengthen. But do we want to only shorten a muscle that needs to yield for a baby to come through? Not the best. And so, yeah, that's one of the things you mentioned that we love to show is how can we create a full range of motion in that pelvic floor? It shouldn't just be strong here. It should be strong here, 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 and here. Exactly. And that's just not about releasing necessarily. It's about a lengthening load. And another cool thing I just want to mention about the pelvic floor, I think people think it's one muscle, but When you do external hip rotation, so bringing your knees out, you lengthen some parts of the pelvic floor and shorten other parts. When you do internal hip rotation, so bringing your ankles out, you lengthen the posterior aspect and you shorten the anterior. And so just understanding that your pelvic floor is much more dynamic and it needs a dynamic experience in preparation for birth and for life, that's huge, right? So this was really fun. I feel like we could jam forever. So Anne, where can people find you? Just so they know, she's in New York City, but I just want them to know all your info so that they can find you.
So my Instagram is Prenatal Massage Center, and also my I'm on Facebook, also Pinterest, and also my website is prenatalmassagecenter.com. And we have offices in Manhattan and Queens. And yeah, so you can look on our website for all of our services. And I'm really excited about offering Body Ready Method sessions to our clients. We have them in our offices. They're one-on-one sessions. So the person that we're seeing can kind of get a customized Body Ready Method plan for themselves.
I love that. And of course, you'll be able to see Anne if you join the Body Ready Method Pro training this fall. She's a TA. And so we have some amazing TAs to support your knowledge and group leaders as well. So we are a beautiful community. Thanks, everyone.